Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Assam, and today I'm your host and one of the ACM members. Today, for our session, we have a really special guest from IT industry, Bharam Baloch, who is one of the three TensorFlow certified developer in Pakistan, and currently he is working as an associate data scientist at Security AI. Bharam, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Over to you.
Okay. So let's just get started. First, let me just share my screen. So, hi everyone. There's a link in the slides which you can use to access these slides. I will just keep this screen for a couple of seconds before I move on. Okay, so I am Behram Khan Baloch. As our host mentioned, I'm one of the certified TensorFlow developer in Pakistan. I think there are more than three now, but yeah, there are just few of them, and I am one of them. And about my experience, I am currently working as an associate data scientist in security.ai. I have also experience in Next Degree, Fidelity.ai, and Semantic. So that's what my experience has been so far. I also have some research experience. I have basically two publications as of now, and one of them I was presented in 2019 in Nagoya, Japan. So I have experience of in both fields in the practical research and uh, some of research as well. So today's session is going to be a little different than what I usually do. Usually I give sessions on particular tech stacks and teach different things, but because I know teaching something technical in an online meeting is not that beneficial. So for this session, what we are going to do, we are just going to talk about some random facts and some random information that I think a student should know. And I will be answering a lot of questions that you guys have about what is data science that we usually see in courses and Coursera, and what actually is data science that is being implemented and practiced in the industry as well. So initially, I will just talk about what are the applications that we usually see when we talk about AI or data science. So in general, applications are infinite, and the simplest one, probably the first problem that is solved using data science or machine learning or deep learning is probably the image classification problem, and one of the biggest uh, data set available for supervised learning is also the ImageNet. So when we are talking about image classification, it simply means given two pictures, let's say one of the dog and one of the cat, we want our model to be able to distinguish between cat and dog. And that's simple image classification. That's literally the bread and butter of deep learning applications. But we will see that how in simple image classification can become really hard when we are trying to do it in pre-test or in production level. Another example is natural language processing. Simplest example of natural language processing is, let's say, when you are typing something on your phone, you get suggestion of next word. That's basically predicting what you will type next. So that's the simplest use case of natural language processing. And another very prominent use case of deep learning is that self-driving cars. We all have heard about Tesla and the autopilot system. So that's another use case that we are interested in. Another one of is when we are trying to, given an image, we are trying to answer some of the questions. And if you are trying to understand what kind of use cases this can have, if let's say someone is visually impaired and can't see, and he or she is wearing a Google glasses, so Google glasses can actually answer a lot of questions for that particular person. There's also image captioning, which is kind of the same thing. I'm just going to stop at those applications that I find interesting. So here's one of interesting application of deep learning. One of the important factor when we are doing any kind of problem is we usually don't have a lot of data for it. So if you are able to somehow uh, present a problem in a way or formulate a problem in a way that you don't need a lot of data or don't need to label a lot of data, that's usually a good way to start. So here what we are saying is a simple problem where what we are trying to do, we take a lot of videos from YouTube, we separate the audio and the video, and we then try to train a model. So basically we give the video as the input and we try to generate the audio out of it. So there's a really good formulation, because you can download as many videos that you want from the YouTube, and you get the local data when you just separate out the audio and video. Some other applications are we are trying to generate recipes, and you see, usually the models usually know nothing about the language itself. They don't know what words are or what ingredients are or anything like that. They don't even know the meaning of the word, but they are able to generate a lot of real life looking recipes and stuff like that. So that's one of the things. There are some examples of poetry. One prominent example is basically the universal style transfer. If you know about the Prisma app, that got a lot of fame in few years back. So that's basically universal style transfer. We also can do some thing like when the car is driving, just by the audio feed, try to do if whether the road is better or not, and so on. We can also compose music using deep learning, and I just want to play one example of it, that how realistic it can be. Do let me know if you hear the voice when I play the video. Can anybody confirm that if they can hear the voice when I play the video?
No voice.
I don't think so. Can I show? Let me try to share this step first.
Yes, voice.
So now again, in this particular case, deep learning or any kind of model does not know what the sound is or what an instrument is, but it is able to create or mimic a sound that usually a person can create using a piano. Now another application can be skin cancer detection. Basically, it basically means that we have a face and we have some of the spots on the face, and we can have a model that can distinguish between a normal spot and spots that might be skin cancer and so on. So basically, this provides us a really efficient way to detect anomalies like these. Like let's say you can have this system integrated in Zoom, and whenever someone is using Zoom, it can also automatically identify a lot of diseases like that. But one of the most interesting part in this image is not that how we are detecting or what we are detecting, but it's something different. Can you guys take 2-3 minutes and look at this slide and can find the most interesting part of the slide?
That it detected some kind of mark on the face. But
Well, yeah, but that's what we are trying to do. But that's not the most special thing about this particular slide, at least. Okay, so the most important or the surprising fact about this slide is that by law you can never show a picture of a patient, right? So basically, there are a lot of compliances like HIPAA and other compliance laws, basically which protects a patient's data. So you can't take a real person and show his picture and show cancer detected on his face. So the most interesting part about this particular slide is that the person you are seeing does not exist. This image was created by an AI model. And I think that's fascinating, because I don't think anyone, a normal human being, can see this picture and can tell whether this picture was real or not. And now many of you might not believe me, so I will just try to show you one short video where we can experience that how a deep learning model can actually understand how a face looks, and how can a model create more faces if their videos plays at us. So you can here just see that model is making really slight changes to change the face and creating different faces. So that's an example that how powerful these machine learning models can be. All of the faces that you're seeing do not exist. They are real faces. And what I did to create this model, I just took an old model from 2015 and 16, and just fed a random seed to it, and then kept changing seed a little bit, and different kind of faces start appearing. some other interesting use cases when we use something like encoder decoder network. The general idea about an encoder, I'm not going to in details, but what we're trying to do is we fed an image to the neural network, and output is also an image. What is different that we have a bottleneck layer, which means that complete image needs to be represented in, let's say, 128 numbers, and then reconstructed from those 128 numbers. When our model is able to do that, it basically has two parts of it. The first part is encoder, which takes an image and just describe those numbers as 128 numbers. Then the second part takes those 128 numbers and create a whole image. So what essentially we are doing is we are training two parts of the networks. One which can compress an image in 128 numbers without losing anything, and other a decoder that can take that 128 numbers and can decode those numbers to actual image. Now we can have many use cases for that. First one can simply be the compression algorithm. Other can for security purposes as well, because if you don't have both of these networks, those 128 numbers are not really useful to you because you can't convert back them to the image. So there's a secure way of changing the image as well. Now you can do a lot of different things with that. Like you can probably do something like segmentation, or let's say you can do you can have input a image to the model and can get the edge map. But that's not really exciting because getting an edge map is a really simple thing. You can probably do it without machine learning or anything. But the interesting use case is you can actually feed image edges and get the real images out of it. Now, this particular thing can have many use cases. Like when you go to a police station and you have a sketch of a particular criminal, you can get a real life image out of that sketch. And maybe you have a deleted part of an image and create the actual image out of it. These models might seem that they don't get used that much, but if you have used Photoshop, Photoshop actually uses these kind of model inside it when you're basically trying to fix a part of the image. And there are some more use cases. More use cases, but I'm talking about this particular one. This is basically we were trying to design some Pakistani designs using machine learning models, and this was basically a startup that was incubated in Nest.io. It was called Emotive, and this was a Pakistani startup basically trying to create designs using machine learning. So you can just press a button and new design will come up. Now I'm just trying to focus on more of data science related things. When I say data science, it obviously includes machine learning, but more of traditional or tabular data approaches that we see. So it can be the data science application in general, if you're talking about industry, can be broken into different parts. So starting with e-commerce, when I'm talking about e-commerce, simplest example can be Daraz. If you open the Daraz app, you see just for you section. That just for you section is basically created by for you, and it's probably using some kind of machine learning and recommendation models and stuff like that. The healthcare, we saw a sample of skin cancer detection, but some of the more prominent or more famous use case of in healthcare was COVID detection. People were just taking some X-rays and MRIs and different kind of data as input and try to detect whether or not a particular person has COVID or not. So that was another use case. And we also have transport, self-driving cars, finance, banking, and manufacturing. We have many use cases that we can think of. But if you think of it, everything you have studied in your class so far, or maybe on an online course, does not actually cover these use cases in depth or at all, to be very honest. Mostly you are doing image classification or more simple thing like maybe you are trying to predict that what rating a movie will get or stuff like that. You are not really trying to do a lot of industry-oriented or practical work. Maybe you're using a really fancy model that gives you 99% accuracy or 98% accuracy, but to be very honest, these numbers don't make that much sense when you are going live or doing different kind of stuff. We will talk about this in the latest section as well. So I just passed the application because I was not really interested in talking about applications. You probably have heard a lot about them. The next part of the presentation is where I will be just presenting some facts, and we will sort of have a dialogue. So I will try to get what your perception is about this thing and what my experience have been about that particular thing. So it has to. The first part was not mandatory to be interactive, but this second part has to be interactive, so I will probably be asking some of the questions from you as well. So first, before starting, I have to just present a simple question. What do you think a data scientist does? Anyone can answer whatever you want to answer. Just give me something that what's the first thing that comes in your mind when we say what does a data scientist do? Just tell me anything. It could be wrong, and don't be shy.
Data modeling.
Data modeling is one thing. Okay. Anything else?
Draw conclusions from data, kind of analysis from the data.
Sorry, can you repeat it?
Drawing some conclusions from the data, or finding out doing some kind of analysis on the data. That's one.
Yeah, that's really high level. Can you just maybe be a little more specific?
Get some insights from data.
Trends projections.
Trends projection. Okay. Any other thoughts? How many of you think that how much time do we spend writing SQL queries? A data scientist. Uh, 10 minutes, okay. I don't think so. How much time do you think we usually spend, let's say, in a day making plots? Or do you think writing APIs is something a data scientist should do or would do? You can just, if you don't want to open your mic, you can just post it on chat as well. Okay, so according to you guys, writing API is not something that data scientists would do. Okay, what about plotting? We talked about SQL, debugging. Let's say how much time our data scientists would usually spend in debugging. Debugging could be anything in data or in literally a REST API or a different kind of system that is working somewhere. I'm talking about percentages, so we get that more ideal. Putting it in hours is a bit difficult. Like how much time? Like 10% of it, 20% of it, 30% of it. Okay, now let's get a little more away from it. How much time? How often you think a data scientist will create a UI, a GUI? Would he or would he not? As I'm getting numbers 0, 0, and 5%. Okay. Let me check something different. Do you know what a regex is? Do you think a data scientist would ever write regex? Okay, I got one yes. You can always answer yes and no. And you can also answer I don't know. To get a specific pattern in data, yes. Okay, to be honest, everything that I've mentioned is something a data scientist might do, depending on who you ask and where you are working. So, to be very honest, this is the one thing that most of the people don't get. That the definition of what a data scientist does is really vague, and it really depends where you are. Let's say you are in a company where this is a possibility that data scientists will just do ETL and nothing else. You will be just extracting data, transforming it and loading it, and will do nothing else. There could be a data scientist who usually spends 80% of his time writing SQL queries and nothing else. 80% of the time. So you are technically a database person rather than a data science person. There could be a person who usually spends 50% of the time writing the APIs. And I think most of the data scientists at least have to make UIs at least once a year. If you're talking about the startups and small companies, and most of the job openings that you are going to find in data science are going to come from startups and small companies. So you will be making UIs as well. And a really crucial skill to have as being data scientist is being able to create a UI, because your numbers and your dark terminal does not feel appealing. But a small UI that shows what your model does is really important. Just to summarize, what does a data scientist do? The least activity that a data scientist usually does is modeling, and most of the courses teach us modeling, nothing else. But when we move on, we will see that why is this case, that modeling itself is not that big part of a job of a data scientist. So another question is, how important you think programming or coding is for a data scientist? How strong a programming should be for a data scientist? You can always answer in chat. Well, let me just be blunt. If you're not good at coding, you probably can't become a data scientist, because there's a lot of programming that you need to do. Unless you are working in a company that provides you a lot of UI-based tools, you will probably be doing a lot of programming, and you need to know a lot of things about different things. Because remember, when you are making a model or making anything related to data science, it's usually that there are a lot of other things working around that model. So you need to fit your model in a space. It's not like we usually think we will make a model that will be the core of the product, but that's not real. Some startups may do it, but usually there are many like Daraz. Daraz has a big data science team, but remember, Daraz is an e-commerce platform. So you need to understand what e-commerce means, what the domain knowledge is, and what the general architectures, and then you can only fit your model to a particular use case. And to do that, you need to know a lot about software development, and also a lot about programming, because if you are working for a good company, they probably are building their project in Java or C# or something like that. So even if you are making a model in Python or TensorFlow, Keras, or SQL, whatever, you probably need to interact with Java code and C# code or stuff like that to actually get your model running. And the most important thing, if you are going to give an interview somewhere, you probably need to clear a programming or what we call problem solving interview, and that's where programming will be tested as well. Another important point is having a sense of data. Now, it is a really vague thing to say, but when I mean sense of data, can any one of you tell me that how can we convert the figure B into figure A? When I mean figure, I want to make them linearly separable. When I mean linearly separable, it means I want to transform this data in a way that I can create a single line between them to distinguish between both type of the classes. But we can see green and blue here. It's not that easy, but I will just stop for a minute, I guess, and give you guys a chance if you can come up with a technique that can transform B into A. Yes, normalization is the way to go. Implementation is data engineer work to do. What is a data engineer also gets vague, because to be very honest, when people hire a data scientist, they are usually hiring a software developer, a data engineer, a data ML engineer, and it's more of a holistic thing. You probably also need to create PowerPoint presentations as well. So the definition of what data scientist is really big. I'm not just talking about Pakistan, in whole over the world. So normalization is one of the way, not one of the way, but it's the partial solution. But what kind of normalization? Use SNS to plot that line. But if you look at B, you can't plot that line, because one class is encapsulated by another class. So this is physically impossible to draw a straight line and separate green from blue. I will just tell you the answer, and you can probably figure out that how it works. What you need to do is first you need to normalize it by subtracting mean from x and y, and then you need to square x and y. If you do this, the data B will transform into a somewhat looking like egg. Basically, it will be linearly separable. I'm just writing this down, and you can probably try it and confirm it. Subtract. Now I'm just talking about a simple classifier which takes a image as an input, and the model basically what it does is it classifies that whether the image is dog and cat. Can you think of what can go wrong here? I have a really simple model that has a really good accuracy. Let's say its accuracy is 99.9999999. So really, the model is really good. What can go wrong here? Again, what the model does is takes picture of a dog or a cat and classifies as a dog or cat. That sometimes it says that the dog is cat. Okay, I'm good with it. You can because the accuracy is 99.99999. So this particular case will come really less often. We can say. If the input pick is neither cat or not dog, yes, this is basically the hard case that we need to deal with, because again, when we are usually building such kind of model, we don't really cater this third case, because let's say if you are deploying this model in a phone or something, most of the time the camera won't see a dog or cat at all. It will see a random background, a negative class, and to model that negative class is the hardest. And what generally happens, let's say you make a document classifier which take a picture of a passport or a CNIC and tells whether it's a passport or a CNIC. And let's say you also have a negative class which basically tells there's nothing in it. But then you test your model and your accuracy is really good in 90s. And when it goes to QA, what QA does is take the picture of his chair, maybe takes a picture of his phone or random stuff, and then reports 10 bugs to you. And bug is that when you show it back, it says passport. When you showed sky, it says, let's say it says passport again. When you showed grass, it says CNIC and stuff like that. So this is where usually the model breaks. Distinguishing the negative class is the hardest, and you need to do a lot of work to just get that negative class right. Because imagine when you are making even a small system, let's say a dog versus cat classifier, and you are scanning the whole database of Facebook. So there are going to be a lot of images that do not belong to either cat or dog, and you will see a lot of misclassifications as well. So catering negative class is the hardest, and that's something that usually no online course will teach you, or something that wouldn't be covered in class at all. And that's the most important thing to keep in mind when you are making a model, because model does not work in controlled environment most of the time, unless it does. If it works in controlled environment, which means it only sees cat or dog, well, good enough. But that's not usually the case. Yes, whenever we are trying to build a model, the first thing we need data. And when we need data, we usually go at Kaggle or UCI repository or stuff like that. But when you are industry, that when you are working with data is always missing. You can think of a simplest problem that you might want to work on that isn't you haven't been inspired from Kaggle or something like that, and you will find you don't have a you don't have data for it. Let's say you want to make a classifier which distinguishes between dal chawal or biryani. You won't find data for that. And to be very honest, you will come across very simple use cases that you want to implement, and you can easily make good bugs out of it, but you will find that there is simply no data for it. And then a data scientist become a data collector, and that's something that you are going to do. Or maybe you won't do it and leave the problem won't solve the problem at all, but this is something that exists. that in industry, data never exists. Everyone's want to invest on data scientists and so on, but if you tell them you want to hire 10 people just to label the data or collect the data, most of the people won't be fascinated about that fact. Another thing that most of students, or I see, including myself, used to get fascinated is that I have to do a, let's say, sentimental analysis. I have just to take a text review and classify it as positive and negative. When I use some traditional techniques or some simple machine learning models, I got an accuracy of 80% or 90%. Then I found out there is a new thing called transformer, and it gives me an accuracy of 98%. So I took it, and then I tried to put it in the production, but I realized that it uses 8 GBs of RAM, and my whole other architecture only uses, let's say, 3 GB of RAM. So is that thing actually practical or not? It's not. And usually you don't care about, you don't see a difference between 87 or 97, to be very honest, because 87 is good enough number. Again, here are the thing we are adding is a feature rather than the whole product itself. If my whole product was distinguishing between a positive review and negative review, the 97 would have looked attractive. But let's say if you are just distinguishing between a fake and real review on Daraz or Amazon or something like that, 87% accuracy is still good enough. Now, a lot of confusion that I see in students and that exists in industry as well is they're confused at how much stats and prop they need to know. First, I will just present this question to you guys: that how much stats do you think you guys should know? You can always answer on the chat. Most of the time, a lot, 70 to 82%. I've been getting a lot. So basically, the general consensus is that stats is really important and you must know it. Also, linear algebra. Yes, when I'm talking about stats, I'm usually talking about prop, stats, linear algebra, and everything. So yeah, it is really important. But let me just say this: it's also overhyped as well. Why it's overhyped? Because most of the senior people in the industry who have title of data scientists were probably born before, are working from a time that you weren't even born, and they weren't doing machine learning at that time. They were doing stats, even though their title is data scientists, but they know mostly stats, and they are also using statistical models rather than deep learning or machine learning models. So over the time, what we have seen, because the hiring people were statisticians rather than actual data scientists, there was a huge bias in the industry that whenever you go for an interview, they ask you a lot of stats. But if you go blunt with them and ask them that where do I'm going to use these complicated things, they will tell you, no, we don't usually use them. Because you can talk about fitting very complicated distributions and doing different kind of tests to verify a lot of it. But in the end, a decision tree and linear regression is the most prominent algorithm that you will see people in industry are using now. XGBoost as well. It is basically gradient boosted trees. So yes, stats is really important. You should have general sense of it, but don't go crazy about it because I have seen that a lot of courses, I'm not naming it, professionals that are offering a lot of paid courses, they teach a lot of stats and try to portray that that's the most important thing. Yeah, it is important, but just don't go crazy over it. And making a lot of different kind of plots with different kind of meaning on R is not that useful. A linear regression model or a decision tree that gives an 80% accuracy usually works fine, because that's what we are trying to do. The good scientist is the one who's better statistician than software engineers. Better software engineers. Yeah, so scientists are who's better. Yeah, so it's somewhere in between. So you don't need to be a statistician. That's my point. But those people who have created this standard, because they come from that background and don't know a lot of shit about it. So they ask that shit from you guys, and that's not important. That's a core fact. They can use a RIMA model to do time series, but using Facebook's profit will always give you better results most of the time. So there's that. So it is if you want to pass the interview, you probably need to know a lot of different kind of tests, but rest assured that when you are doing a lot of practical stuff, you are not going to use that much test at all. But by the way, I like the quote, your name, Hassan. Another important thing, which I've probably mentioned once before, the model is not the center of your system. But this is a really complicated thing of saying that. How to put it more simply? I can go back to the RAS example. When you're ever making or deploying a model of the RAS that is related to data science or something like that, that is not the center of what the RAS does. Or let's say you're making a prediction model for Kareem. Again, that model is not the center of what Kareem does. So you don't, you can't change things with respect to the model. Like let's say you are getting 10 features from a system, and you want to have an 11th feature, and for that 11th feature, a software engineer has to teach a lot of architecture. They won't do it because you are not that important. You are there to give a performance boost, not to just increase the work exponentially. So most of the time, you have to go for the low-hanging fruits in general. So basically, you get what you get. You can't just change everything that has been going on, and just because you need to fit a transformer or a resonant with 1,000 layers or 2,000 layers in the network. So there's that. Probably this is something that you won't get right now, but let me just put it in a different wording as well. Let's say when you are creating a project in your university, and the core part, selling part is the AI model that you are using. If you are unable to make a PyQt work with your model, you just change the PyQt and you probably shift to a different UI-based system or something like that. If you are unable to write a REST API on your system, you don't use REST API at all. You find an alternative where the model can fit or work. So the model is the center of your whole project, but that's not practical thing to do, and that's not what industry does, because your model usually provides a minimal value to the whole thing. Oh, and now presenting you. I was expecting that probably most of you know some of the Python and have been affiliated to data science somewhat. So I'm just presenting you a short code here, and I want you to guess what is happening here. So basically, there are two cells, and I will just keep this slide on for 1 to 2 minutes and let you guys try to predict what is happening here. This is basically a simple vanilla neural network or an ANN. But what's exactly happening here, that's what you guys have to predict or guess. Yeah, Bawal knows the answer because he saw me making the presentations, and I literally told him what I was doing. Yeah, good for you, Bawal. Another important thing is tools. When you're working with data science, you need a lot of you need to understand a lot of tools. If you don't have experience with Amazon Web Services and you call yourself a data scientist or are going into the industry, you are going to have a hard time because most of the services that we are servers we are using or which are hosting the model or training the model are on AWS. Another API is FastApp. That's important. You need to know something about PyTorch. You need to know something about TensorFlow and sklearn. You probably know about sklearn and TensorFlow and PyTorch. What you do, and you also know Matplotlib. What most of you don't know is Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or Docker or about Amazon SageMaker or about Git. So if you don't know a lot of different tools that usually people use in software development, you will have a hard time, because remember, the model is not the center of your system. It's a part of it. It's a really important part, but it's a part of it. So it is possible that you have to follow a lot of practices that software development, software engineer is following to make your model work, because you will be assigned a ticket. You can be a data scientist, but when there is bug, you will be assigned a ticket. You will need to create a branch. You will need to write some tests, so to see whether the bug you were trying to fix is fixed or not. You will need to create a unit test for it, and probably create a ticket for it, and you need to know how to push it. You will also run into some of the uh, get conflicts, and you will have to know how to resolve them. And if your system is Docker based, then you probably have to have some understanding of how Docker works. You need to put how you need to pull containers, start them, make changes in them, and stuff like that, and probably push them as well. So you need to know Docker and other stuff like that. Basically, usually what a software development engineer is doing in his day-to-day work. You usually don't need to create a lot of stuff, but you at least should know how to use them. So probably the Docker images will be created by a software engineer, but you should know how to use them, because let's say the source of the data is coming from a Docker server, so you should know how to start it at least. So coming back to basically software development, you need to know a lot of stuff about software development. So only then you will be able to work efficiently, because there's something you can't avoid. Let's say I'm a data scientist and I usually work with Python, but our core system is on Java. So usually I train the model and then I need to deploy it in the Java as well. So there's time to time I need to also write some code in Java as well. Or let's say just need to understand what another person has said to make some kind of changes to it. So again, this is something you should know how to start a Redis server, or start or stop different microservices to know how, to get your system up and running. Only then you can obviously test it. Like in my case, our whole system is on Java, and there is an ML services to it. But I need to run the Java code to see that how well my model is working in the whole system. Well, I need to integrate it myself. No one else is going to integrate that server for me. Probably I will get a lot of help of it. They will create the general architecture and just give me the portion where I need to add everything. But it's going to be me who is going to add that particular model to the system most of the time. Another important thing you should know that will probably help you is Google Colab. So let me just bring this question. How many of you guys know about Google Colab? There's one, two, there's three. Honestly, if you are graduating soon and you don't know about Google Colab, I feel sorry for you guys. It's like Google Colab is like one of the most important free tool available there, and you don't have to be a data scientist or interested in machine learning to know about Google Colab, because it's like they give you free GPU, free internet, and you can probably use a second generation laptop to do a lot of heavy computing stuff. So I would just simply say check out Google Colab, because I don't see many modes and there are three people. So let me just show you quickly what Google Colab is. If you can just search Google Colab on Google, you will see this is basically similar to what a Jupyter notebook is, and you can run different kind of Python related stuff here. It's simply a notebook, but what is good about it that this is hosted on Google server, so you can do a lot of stuff here. So it is simply like a Jupyter notebook, but what you get is you can go to the runtime, go to the change runtime, yet you can get GPUs and TPUs here. And if you are like me and have the pro version of it, basically you are paying $11 a month for this. You can also get the high RAM option here. High RAM option basically means that usually it has 12 GB of RAM, but if you are paying $11 for it, you will also get the high RAM, which is basically 25 GB of RAM. And the interesting thing about it, that it gives you a lot of features. Like one of the features, you can directly mount it to your Google Drive. So you can just put the data on your Google Drive and take the data from Google Drive, do some training, and save your model back to the Google Drive as well. It is really handy when you're doing web scraping, because this is something hosted on Google's server. So you get really good internet speed as well. This is a tool that I think every CA student should know by now, because that's really important. Even if you know minimal Python, this can help you do a lot of stuff. So I did not have a particular objective today. I was just sharing a lot of information to give you a somewhat a picture of what goes into the industry and create some confusion so you can think about it. I would just say just think about it and see, and if you have more questions, I'm obviously ready to answer. So if you have any confusions or any questions at all, like what do people ask in an interview, how much salary do you get, or how fast you should switch, or which courses are important, or where to study, I'm open to every question that you can ask. Go ahead. From which I was kind of lucky. I was basically in my second semester, and there was a research group going on in my uni fast, and I was just picked up. And the first course that I did was CS231N, and we were basically watching the lectures and doing some assignments of CS231N, and I was also being taught by some of the professors there. It was more of a volunteer thing they were doing, but yeah, I started pretty early. So I started in 2016. What are the expectation of entry-level data scientists? Again, where you are going, that highly depends on it. If you are going to, let's say, an Affinity, if you're going to Affinity, you just need to clear the interview, and then you will use a lot of tools. So you don't need a lot of stuff. You don't need to know a lot of stuff. You will have a particular set of tools that you will be using, and you will getting a hefty paycheck for it. But let's say you are going to a startup and they want someone who knows CV, computer vision, and NLP both. Then yeah, but at least you should know some stats. You should know something about Keras or TensorFlow. You should be familiar with sklearn, and you should be good at programming. That is a really important thing. If you are good at programming and you have a good general sense, you can probably pick up multiple things. Master one language or multiple programming language. I would say you don't need to master language at all. Just get the sense of programming. If you have the sense of programming, you just can move around between one language to another language. Picking up a language is not that important, but yeah, you should always start with C. If you know C or C++, then moving to Python or Java to C# to another language is not that hard. How important is deep learning specialization for understanding DL and becoming ML, engineer, or data scientist? I would say everyone should do every deep learning specialization that Coursera is offering or deeplearning.ai is offering. You should do every one of them. And remember, that is an open resource, free resource that you can avail. You should watch every one of them. I'm not claiming that they will give you a lot of information, but what I'm claiming that you will learn a lot out of it. You will get a good sense of how to. Also, did help getting a better opportunities? No, I haven't made a switch after getting the certification. To be very honest, I got the certification after getting into security, so I don't know. It might help in future, but we will see. Should you do it? I won't recommend it. I did it because when I was doing, there were basically no one in Pakistan that had that certification, so I was like, let's be the first one. And when I did, apparently two more have already passed the test, so I was the third one. So yeah, don't pay $100 for nothing. Python versus R for visualizations. If you are good at Python. If you are good at R. If you are good at Power BI. You don't even need programming for it. Many people who do a lot of intensive work with visualization usually use Tabula or Power BI or stuff like that. They don't even use programming languages. How should one start data science? I think the stepping stone should be the machine learning course by Dr. Andrew Ong on Coursera. That should be the stepping stone. Then you can move to a specialization of IBM or the one provided by Google or stuff like that. Just do a specialization that usually covers 6 to 7 courses. You get the general picture of it. Then you can move to Kaggle, see what other people are doing in competition, and then take part in the competition to get some real life experience. I shouldn't be calling it real life experience, but yeah, at least some programming experience and see what other people are doing. But remember, Kaggle's provide you the data set. In industry, you rarely have the data set. And if you have the data set, it's not that well defined, because let's say if you are trying to predict what would be the sales of a particular product, the data will not be tabular. It will be hierarchical. It will have multiple tables. Let's say it will have like if you talk about a single product, let's say a perfume bottle or oil bottle, let's say we are talking about Soya Supreme. Soya Supreme can be in a pouch, in a bottle, or of different volumes, obviously. So each of them will get a different SKU. So how do you model them? Should you model Soya Supreme oil as one product, or you should model them differently? Because maybe modeling them differently could be more useful. Now again, should I model sales of a one district or one city or one province, or should I take in account population? Let's say a whole Khyber Pakhtunkhwa can be one unit, but let's say because Karachi is really big and there's a lot of sales here, I can probably try to predict sales for every district. Now, one more thing can be, let's say, if you're talking about Unilever, so they have a lot of products, I guess 100, 200, 300 products. But if you really look at the numbers, only 10 to 20% of their products covered 90% of their sales. So should I even be worried about those 280 other products at all? I could just focus on those 10 to 20 products to get the real numbers, because those are the important numbers. Those are earning me the real cash. So those become important. How much important a mentor is? Oh, sorry, I missed a bunch of questions. Model them differently. Yeah, basically you have to try a lot of stuff. That's what I did in next degree, and we literally came up to the conclusion that modeling only 10 products could cover 90% of the sales, and we shouldn't even try to cover all of the product. How much important a mentor is when you are rookie or beginner in DSML, DLML? It is really important, to be very honest, because there are a lot of resources, and there are a lot of people claiming they know a lot of stuff and claiming what they can tell you what is important and what you should learn. But to be very honest, there are too many experts with no real experience. So yeah, getting a good mentor is really important. We usually talk a lot about how models and improvements to the accuracy work. Can we talk about different ways, the best way to deploy the trained model on mobile application or perhaps website, different kind of use cases for the teaching for scope project on FIP, let's say considering a student's details? And I don't really get the question, it's too big, but can we talk? Yeah, basically you're talking about what we fancy name of ML ops. So basically, we're talking about how to train model, but how to take a pre-trained model to production, basically, and how to make it efficiently work or fit it perfectly, write all the data pipeline and so on. Osama, can you rephrase your question and be a little more specific? I don't really think I get your question. I just get you are talking about ML ops in general, about how the model works in production and everything, but I don't know what you're specifically asking. How effective is ML for stock forecasting? Some people have worked in Street Labs and they were doing a lot of stuff in stock forecasting, and we probably can ask these questions from them. I don't have much experience in stock forecasting as such. I have with sales forecasting, and that is more stable in general. There are many local industries teaching data science. Are they worth it? We should go with the online resources. Getting a mentor is good, so you should try some of them. I am going to recommend one of them. I'm already sharing the screen, right? So yeah, if you search on Facebook, you will probably find Next Generation Analytics. This particular what should I call it? Teaching is coaching or what? It's not a coaching, but these are a bunch of people who used to teach in FAST, and they're really good. They have both done their masters, one from NID and one from Korea and stuff like that. These people were also my mentors, and they know their shit, to be very honest. Unlike most of the people, they have real experience. So you can just a special interest group. Yeah, that's a better term. So, and they don't even charge that much. They charge a commitment fee, but that's because if you bring students for free, they run away. And they don't take a lot of students, so you probably need to get a recommendation to get in. So that's the main difference. If something is easy to get in, then probably they are trying to make money. If a place is really hard to get in, then yeah, that's a place that is doing useful stuff. So I will really recommend you Next Generation Analytics Labs. if you are a kind of person who needs to go to a person to learn everything, but if you are good at doing stuff online, do it online. You don't need to go to anyone or pay a single penny to anyone, to be very honest. You can learn everything you need to know online. There are a lot of resources. I've also mentioned some of the theoretical courses in sites as well. Basically, if you are more of a computer vision guy, you should at least see CS231N to understand the convolutional neural networks and deep learning part of it. And also, there's a course in Udacity 810D, which covers traditional computer vision as well. So that's a course you should do. If you cover both of these, you will have really good understanding of how computer vision works and how it used to work. So you will have a good grasp of it. If you are more of NLP guy, at least 2 to 4. NLP by Christopher Manning. Again, all of these are available on YouTube, and there are some for deep reinforcement learning, and that I think you shouldn't go for now because deep reinforcement learning is tough. It's not that practical as of now. It will be in future, obviously, but not a good place to start if you want to get a job. But let me just mention in deeplearning.ai, you should do all of their specializations. I don't expect you to understand everything, but just do them. Get the general sense of out of it, because it will give you a more of a holistic picture. They don't claim to teach you anything, but just get an example of it. Yeah, so sometimes, okay. But sometimes we get lost because of the amount of content available in internet and don't know how to make a correct direction. Yeah, that's why I prefer NGA. Let's just use an example. I have a application that clicks picture. I need to send that picture to my model through my backend on desktop and return the results. Okay, vector imaging. What technology or method can I use for this connection? But in general, what are the methods that we students working the data science project can use to make the model useful like this and backend application? Also, you at least need to write. First of all, you need to write your basic what you're making. You need to have a kind of REST API. You can use literally simple Flask, or let's say you can use the fast API. But more important is that how you're hosting that model at all. Like even if you are using something simple as Flask, if you want to make your model more robust, you can probably use something called TensorFlow Serving. If you are using TensorFlow, it basically encapsulated a lot of serving methodologies and logic that you don't need to write yourself, and isolate one call from another. That's a really important thing to do. By the way, whenever you are trying to send image to a remote server, probably you're doing something that is not right, because sending that much information to a server can never be good. If your let's say model is hosted on the same device the UI is working on, then UI is making calls to that particular model while remaining on the same network, that makes sense, because if you're on the same network, you will have a lot of high speed. But if you are making the call through internet, that's not the right way to do. If you have to make a lot of frequent calls, unless 5G is here. One more question: how much theory is enough to start with hands-on experience? You can, I would perhaps say, just cover the initial course from the first few weeks of machine learning from by Dr. Andrew Ng on Coursera, and start with the practical. It's never too soon. But there's a difference of what you mean by hands-on experience. If you have just covered the first course and you want to try transformers, then no, don't go there. Try out some basic thing, like maybe try out linear regression, logic regression, decision trees, or maybe something more complicated than that. But that's where you start, where you get basic understanding that how the flow of data is and everything, and when to normalize, when not to normalize. Practical projects of freelancing. By the way, if you are doing freelancing, it's probably a practical project because someone wants it. So there should be a good reason out of it. Unless you are doing someone's assignment, then I don't really mind if you're doing someone's assignment, because if you're doing someone's assignment, you are probably doing an assignment that comes from an international university, and that is probably going to teach you a lot of stuff. So freelancing is good, and it's also gives you the motivation of the money, that then you are probably more motivated to do more of them. Because when you're saying practical projects, what practical project you can actually do? You don't have the exposure to the practical world or the practical data. Anything that is available on Kaggle is not really practical. The freelancing also works. I'm probably confused about the practical project thing here. By practical, you mean just testing out different kind of stuff that is available on Kaggle or internet? Yes, do anything you want, freelancing or practical projects that should work. I'm considering the practical project to be industry related thing that actually works in real life. Then I think you won't have that much access to it. Sorry if I confused you. Anything else? Sometimes you get lost amount of content on the internet. I would suggest to pick one particular specialization and do it to the completion. Once you're done with it, the good way, at least when you are starting, is go to the Kaggle and take part in a competition. Take part in competition and try to win it. Even if you don't win it, you will see what other people did and what you were able to do, and probably then you can identify that the gaps you have yourself and can fill them. Because if you are able to do a lot, really good at Kaggle, that also shows up in your CV as well. So there's a plus as well, and you are able to at least identify the gaps you already have and mitigate them. Obviously, it does not teach you a lot of practicality of it, but that's fine because you are starting right now. So yeah, basically Kaggle competition, do Kaggle competitions and identify your gaps and stick to one particular specialization. Don't just hop around too much. How much time should we put up in these before judging ourselves? We might falling behind. I don't understand the question, to be very honest. Falling behind how? Amar, I don't get your question. Can you try to rephrase it? I think Amar is no. You can probably ask me later on. You can always contact me on LinkedIn or my email. I probably have mentioned my email somewhere. Let me write it. That's right. So do we have any other question, or we can probably wrap this up? One thing, how to get the first job? You have more interviews, you will end up at some place. In AI, basically go for a startup. Easiest way to get into a AI or ML related field is go for a startup, and you will probably earn a little less, but you will get the first name on your CV, the first experience in your CV, and then jumping and being there. To be honest, there is the bias in the industry with the uh, basically your affiliation to a particular college can affect. Basically, you're coming from FAST or IPA, you are more likely to get into Affinity or Daraz or places like these who create this bias. But if you are applying from SOFA, you might find it a bit hard. So maybe trying out the small startups can help. Yes, networking, obviously it helps. If you are basically, if you have a strong online presence, they are going to consider you no matter who they are. It can be Truckin or Daraz or Affinity or security. If you have strong online presence on, let's say, GitHub or on Kaggle, they are going to give you the chance. Best AI startups in Karachi. I'm not going to answer that at all because I don't know. And don't go for AI startups in general. You can just go to a company that does good work in ML. Yeah, yeah, good portfolio. Like let's say you have taken part in a lot of competition on Kaggle and you have achieved a good rank there. Then just mention it on your profile, and you can also share your uh, Kaggle notebook or Kaggle profile. So that when you are giving an interview or applying somewhere, so it really puts you apart from rest of the people. But networking also helps. If you are good at something and you have a good network, they will going to recommend your name, and you are going to get more chances. If you are going to get more chances, you are probably going to end up winning a or succeeding at a given chance. How to make a good network? One way could be by going to a lot of availability events that they happen in SIO, Karachi.ai, stuff like that. And to be very honest, there are a lot of forums like Pakistan.ai, there's Karachi.ai, and try to improve yourself in general. If you are good and try to help others uh, on, let's say, Pakistan.ai or Karachi.ai or any other forum, you will get highlighted and people will connect with you. So that's one way to. Oh, sorry, I disconnected. So I was just saying there could be two people who have done similar thing. One have put that to the LinkedIn and got highlighted and probably got a connection request that was basically a reason to land a job, and but did not. So whatever you do, put it on LinkedIn or GitHub or any other social media platform to some get some attention. It always helps. So that's how you make a good net. Should we wrap this? We should wrap this up now. Because I was aiming for 9. It's 9:11. So this talk was in really journal. I just wanted to talk to you guys because I know teaching something technical on an online session is not that effective. So probably we can have one more practical session once the uni is open and COVID is settled down. You guys have my email. If you have anything, you can connect to me on email or can search me on LinkedIn. So it was nice talking to you, or I should say, it was nice chatting to you guys. Bye.
Yep, we should wrap this up. Thanks for
Okay.
the great talk. Uh, it was nice. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz. Thank you.